Greetings and salutations, you adorable, prepubescent anthropomorphic hominids. I'm your friendly neighborhood teacherman, and today we will be going over the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. Water. I mean water. The rise and fall of water, and the rise and fall of things in water. Some people call this buoyancy, but I prefer to call it floaty float. What is floaty float? Let me explain.
Aisha watched as her mother rolled out the puri and put it in the hot oil. She saw that at first the puri sank to the bottom of the pan. As it puffed up, the puri came up and started floating on the oil. One puri did not puff up and did not float like the others. On seeing this, Aisha took some dough and rolled it into a ball. She flattened it and put it in a bowl of water. Alas, it sank to the bottom and stayed there.
As we can see, some things float on water, whereas others sink. So, what causes this to happen? What determines the things that float? Well, obviously, it's floaty float. Buoyancy is a function of volume, or in other words, bigger objects experience float than smaller ones. This is a reason that a puffed puri floats, while dough or flat purists sink. The puffed puri is bigger due to being filled with air, while the flat puri has less air, and the dough has little to no air inside it.
Hey, even tiny scraps of paper float. It can't be purely because of size. Otherwise you would float too, because you're bigger than a puri.
Of course, that's not the whole story. There's another factor, other than floaty float at play here. Most people call it weight, heaviness, or mass, but I prefer to call it sink.
Weight is fine.
Pedantic. Heavier things fall more easily. You may have experienced this yourself. Try to pick up an apple. See how easy that is. Now try to pick up a car. You can't do it, can you? This is because a car is too heavy for you. It's much the same for floaty float. It finds it easier to pick up lighter objects, but harder to pick up heavier ones. Therefore, scraps of paper will float on water, but paper clips the same size will sink. They have more sink than.
Daniel, stop that.
Fine, they have more weight than floaty float. That is not to say that heavy things are impossible to float. For instance, ships are huge. They are much bigger than your car. And they are much heavier too. However, they are bigger than they are heavy, thus, they have floatier float than sink.
Daniel.
That is not to say that your car will necessarily sink either. Most cars, in fact, float because of how large they are. When you are near a large body of water next time, try it out. Push a stranger's car into the water and see whether it floats or sinks.
No, kids, do not do that. I repeat, do not do that.
Make sure not to push your own car into the water. Your parents worked very hard over several years to be able to afford that car. They will scold you. Push in a stranger's car instead. We all know strangers aren't real people. Also, they don't work. Their car probably just fell from the sky.
No, kids, do not do that. I repeat, do not do that. Strangers are people too, I swear.
PFFT. Sure. Strangers are people. Pahahaha. Naive Sylvia. Naive. Innocent Sylvia.
Just push no cars into water. Your parents will scold you even if you push a stranger's car into the water, plus, the stranger will make your parents pay for their car. Thus, do not push any cars into the water.
Or if you do, make sure to do it when nobody's watching, and destroy all the evidence afterwards.
Daniel.
Fine. Don't push cars into water. But do try putting various household items into a bucket of water, and see if they float or not. A needle, a bar of soap, a case of soap with the bar still inside, a Katori, your mother's iPhone.
Daniel.
But haven't you ever wondered whether iPhones float?
They sink, okay. They sink. Let's move on to a less dangerous topic, lest you suggest children throw their entire house into the ocean to see if it floats.
Why, Sylvia, what a wonderful idea.
Next topic.
Fine. There is one last factor affecting floaty float. That is the liquid. Some liquids can produce floatier float than others. For instance, eggs sink in water, but float in salt water. Rotten eggs, however, float in both.
And this, you actually can try at home. Try putting an egg in half a glass of salt water. Now, put fresh water over the egg. You can see the egg floating in the middle of the glass of water. Magic.
And the liquid that produces the most float is mercury. Here are some interesting things you can try with mercury.
No.
Why?
Kids should not be playing with mercury.
Fine, then. How about you try pouring a glass of ice cold water in a pot of boiling hot oil and...
And that's all the time we have today. And remember kids, never, ever, do something Daniel tells you to. It is 100% going to be a bad idea.